On the morning of my 63rd birthday, I came down the stairs in my robe and found a sheet of yellow legal paper folded once on the kitchen island. My wife's handwriting. 3 lines. Took the boy to Scottsdale. Be out by Tuesday. The locks change Wednesday. No name at the bottom. No love. Not even my name at the top. I stood there in my slippers and read it twice. Then I made coffee. Then I sat down at the table where I had eaten breakfast every day for the last 11 years, and I made one phone call. By the time they flew home, the house had a sign in the yard. Not the kind they expected. I want to be honest about something before I tell you the rest. I wasn't shocked. That's the part that took me the longest to admit, even to myself. A person doesn't put a note like that on a kitchen island unless she's been writing it in her head for months. And I'd felt those months. I'd been living inside them, the way you live inside a slow draft from a window you keep meaning to seal. You tell yourself it's not so bad. You put on a sweater. You move the chair. My name is Hank. I retired 3 years ago from a regional freight company outside of Akron, Ohio, where I'd worked for 31 years, the last 12 of those as a dispatch supervisor. Not glamorous work. You sit in a glassed-in office, and you talk to drivers who'd rather be anywhere else, and you keep a clipboard and you don't lose your temper. I was good at it. My foreman used to say I had the kind of patience that could outlast a Cleveland winter, and he meant it as a compliment, and I took it as one. I should have heard the warning in it. Patience that long isn't always a virtue. Sometimes it's just a habit you forgot to put down. I met my wife about a year after my first wife passed. Cancer. Quick, in the end, which they tell you is a blessing, and which I suppose it is for the person going, but it leaves the one staying behind with a kind of whiplash. I was 51 when she died. We hadn't had children. I sold the house we'd lived in because every cabinet handle made me cry, and I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment near the highway, and for about 10 months I went to work and came home and watched the same 3 channels and ate cereal for dinner. Then I met her at a church potluck I almost didn't go to. She brought a sweet potato casserole with marshmallows on top and laughed too loud at something the pastor said, and I thought, there's a woman who isn't carrying anybody's grief. I needed that. I'm not proud of needing it that much, but I did. She was 42, divorced 6 years, raising a boy of 9 on her own. The boy's father was somewhere in Florida, last she'd heard, hadn't paid child support since the kid was 4. She told me all of this in the parking lot afterward while I held her Tupperware. She said it the way some people tell you about a tough commute. Just a fact. I admired that too. We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony at the courthouse downtown. The boy was 10 then. He stood next to his mother in a clip-on tie and didn't look at me once. I told myself he was shy. I told myself a lot of things in those years. Her name was, well, I'll just call her my wife, since that's what she was, legally, until very recently. The boy I'll call her son. He has his own name and his own life now, and I have no interest in dragging either through this, but you should know who they were to me in the shape of things. She was the woman I made coffee for every morning for 11 years. He was the kid I taught to drive a stick shift in the church parking lot when he was 16, even though he never said thank you. Even though he scratched the rear quarter panel, pulling out of a gas station 2 weeks later and blamed the pump. The house was hers when I moved in. A 2-story colonial in a development built in the late 90s, 3 bedrooms, finished basement, a half-acre lot with a maple in the front yard that turned the color of a stop sign every October. She'd gotten it in the divorce. The mortgage had 8 years left on it when we married, and the rate was bad. The kind of rate you got in 2007 if you didn't shop around. And within our first year together, I sat down at her kitchen table. I remember thinking that. And I said, what if we refinanced? Dropped the rate, save us a couple $100 a month. She said, sure, whatever made sense. So we did. And because my credit was better and my income was steadier, the new note went in my name. Just my name. She signed a quitclaim because the title company asked for one, and we didn't think much of it at the time. Or I didn't. I'm not sure what she thought. That's how it goes, isn't it? The biggest things in your life happen on a Tuesday afternoon at a notary's office in a strip mall, and nobody plays any music, and you sign because the woman behind the desk is waiting. And 11 years later, it turns out you've been the legal owner of the house all along and didn't quite realize it because you never had reason to. I paid that mortgage every month from my checking account. I paid the property tax. I paid the homeowner's insurance. I replaced the water heater in 2017 and the roof in 2020, and the maple in the front yard got a fungus. I paid the arborist $1,200 to save it because she liked that tree. I put a new HVAC in the basement the year the boy turned 15 because he complained about his bedroom being hot. None of this seemed remarkable to me at the time. It seemed like what a husband did. It seemed like what a husband did. It seemed like belonging, paid for in monthly installments. The boy and I never warmed up. I want to be fair about that. I don't think he was a bad kid, exactly. He was a kid whose father had walked out when he was 4 years old and then never come back, and a kid like that learns early to keep score, because nobody else is going to do it for him. The trouble was, I wasn't on his ledger as a credit. I was something else. A guy in his mother's bed. A guy at the dinner table. A guy who said the wrong things about homework and asked too many questions about his friends. He called me Hank from the start. Never Dad. I never asked him to. I figured he'd get there in his own time, and then he didn't, and then he was 20, and it was too late, and I'd stopped expecting it. His mother handled him. That was the arrangement, even though no one ever said the word arrangement. When he got in trouble at school, she took the call. When he wanted something, he asked her. When he didn't want to do a chore, he went to her, and she'd come to me later and say, "Just let it go this time," and I'd let it go this time, and the next time, and the time after that. By the time he was a teenager, I had stopped having opinions out loud. I had them. I just kept them where they couldn't make trouble. He went to community college for 2 years and then transferred to a 4-year state school about 3 hours away. He was 20 when he transferred. I'm telling you the timeline because it matters. I paid the application fees. I paid the deposit. I paid the first semester's tuition out of my retirement account because his mother said the financial aid hadn't come through yet, and he'd lose his spot. And I didn't want to be the reason he lost his spot. And I didn't want to be the reason he lost his spot. The financial aid came through 3 weeks later. I never asked what happened to it. I should have. That's another thing I should have done. By the time he was 21, my credit card was on file at the bursar's office. The autopay was set up through my checking. His car insurance was on my policy because it was cheaper that way. The phone he'd had since he was 14 was on my plan. None of this was a plot. It was just the path of least resistance, repeated for a decade until the path was a rut and the rut was a road, and I was the only one walking it. The thing that started turning, if I had to pick a moment, was the summer he came home from school for what he called his real internship. He was 22 then. He worked 3 days a week at a marketing firm downtown, and he made, $14 an hour, and he kept the money, every cent. He didn't pay rent. He didn't buy groceries. He didn't put gas in the car I was insuring. One night I came home from a doctor's appointment, and he was sitting at the kitchen table with his mother, and they were laughing about something on her phone. And when I walked in, they both looked up at me with the same expression, and the expression was, "Oh, you." I won't pretend I knew right then. I knew something. I knew the way, your knee is going to hurt before a storm. I went to bed that night and lay there listening to the H-back I'd put in 7 years earlier, and I thought about the morning my first wife had told me, in the kitchen of the house I'd later sell, that the doctor wanted to run more tests. I thought about how the world had felt that morning. Not different yet, just a half-tone off. Like someone had tuned the radio almost all the way back in, but not quite. The Scottsdale trip got mentioned about 3 weeks before they left. I came in from raking leaves on a Saturday, and she was on the phone in the living room, and I heard her say, "We should drive down to the desert in November. The boys never seen it." I assumed I was the we. I waited for her to invite me. She didn't. A week later, I asked her casually when the trip was. She said, "Oh, I was going to talk to you about that," and then she didn't talk to me about it. She started doing laundry instead. I let it drop. Because that's what I did. I let things drop, And I bent down and picked them up later, and I put them in their place, and nobody noticed because the room was tidy, and that was what mattered. 2 days before she left, I came home and there was a suitcase by the door. Hers. The boy's duffel was on the stairs. She told me she and the boy were flying out Friday morning to see her sister in Phoenix and to drive up to Scottsdale for a long weekend. I asked if I should book a flight. She said no, they needed some time, just the two of them. I nodded. I said, all right. I said, have a good trip. I drove her to the airport at 5 in the morning on Friday, and she kissed me on the cheek at the curb the way you kiss a coworker at a retirement party, and I drove home and walked into the house and made coffee and went to work, and that was Friday. Saturday I raked the rest of the leaves. Sunday I went to church alone. Monday I worked. Tuesday morning I came down and found the note. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time slow, the way you read the warning label on something you've already swallowed. Took the boy to Scottsdale. Be out by Tuesday. The locks change Wednesday. It was Tuesday. The note had been sitting there since Friday. She'd written it before she left and put it where I'd find it after she was gone. I won't pretend I didn't feel anything. I felt a flat, cold thing in the middle of my chest, like swallowing ice water. I felt my hands go a little numb the way they do in cold weather, but I didn't feel surprised. And that was the part that gave me what I needed. Because if I wasn't surprised, then somewhere in me I had been preparing. Somewhere in me, for months, maybe years, I had been taking quiet inventory of who I was in that house and what was mine and what wasn't, and the inventory was complete now, and all that was left was the math. I made the call at 7:30 in the morning. The man I called was a fellow named Ed, a guy I'd known since the 80s when we both worked the loading dock before I went to dispatch, and he went to law school. Ed practiced family law in a small office above a sandwich shop in Cuyahoga Falls. He answered on the second ring. "Hank," he said, "long time. I need an appointment today." I said, "I can come right now if you have it." He didn't ask why. Ed was a guy who didn't ask why on the phone. He said, "Come at 9, and I said thank you, and I hung up and went upstairs and showered and put on a clean shirt and a pair of khakis. And I packed a duffel bag with 3 days of clothes and my shaving kit and the photograph of my first wife that I kept on the dresser and the watch my father left me, and the file folder where I kept every important paper of my life, which I kept in the bottom drawer of the desk in the spare bedroom, because that's where it had always lived. The folder had a label on it in my handwriting from 2004. House. Insurance. Title. Misk. Inside was the deed to the property. My name. Just my name. The quitclaim. The refinance paperwork. 11 years of tax statements with my social security number on every one of them. I put the folder in the duffel. I left the bed made. I turned the thermostat down to 62. I locked the front door behind me. Ed's office smelled like deli mustard from the shop downstairs. He had a desk piled with manila folders and a window that looked out at a parking lot, and a coffee mug from a softball league he'd been on in 1994. He read the note twice. He didn't say anything dramatic. He said, "Whose name is on the house?" "Mine," I said. He looked up. "Just yours. Just mine. Refinanced in 14. She quitclaimed." He set the note down on his desk and folded his hands. "Hank," he said, "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them like a man who has just figured out where he stands. Are you ready to do that?" I said I was. We talked for about 2 hours. He took notes on a yellow pad with a fountain pen, which was an affectation he'd had since law school. By the end of the meeting, he had a plan, and I had a list. The list had 9 things on it. I'm not going to bore you with all of them, but I'll tell you the ones that mattered. First, the locks. She'd written that the locks would change Wednesday. Ed laughed when I told him. Not a mean laugh, a surprised one. He said, "Hank, you own that house. She can't change the locks on a property she doesn't own. If she does, that's a civil matter and we'll deal with it. But more to the point, you can change them today, right now. And she's the one who has to call before coming back. Second, the credit cards, the boy's tuition, the auto insurance, the phone plan. Every line item that ran through my checking or credit was mine to turn off, and I owed nobody an explanation for turning it off. Ed said, "Do it in a single afternoon. Don't drag it out. Don't warn anybody. Just close the loop." Third, the divorce. He said he could file before the end of the week. Ohio's a no-fault state, and given the timeline in the note, it would not be a complicated case. He said, "Do you want to file?" And I sat in his client chair and looked at the parking lot through his window for what was probably half a minute, and I said, "Yes, file it." Fourth, the house itself. This was where Ed paused. He said, "What do you want to do with the house, Hank?" And I thought about the maple tree and the HVAC and the 11 years of mortgages and the kitchen island where she'd left the note. And I said, "No, I want to sell it." He nodded like that was the right answer, but he didn't tell me it was. He just made a note on his pad. I left his office at noon. I drove to a hardware store and bought 2 new deadbolts and a doorknob set and a packet of screws. I drove back to the house. I changed the front door, the back door, and the door from the garage into the kitchen. It took me about an hour and a half. I am not a fast handyman, but I'm a thorough one. I tested every key 3 times. I put the old hardware in a paper bag and set it on the counter where the note had been. I left the note where it was. I wanted her to find it next to the bag. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, and I went line by line through every account I had, and I closed the loops. The credit card she carried as an authorized user closed. The phone line for the boy moved to his own responsibility, effective at midnight. The auto insurance for the car the boy drove at school transferred off my policy, effective at midnight. The Brazar's office at his university. I called them at 1:15, and a woman with a kind voice took my card off file, and I asked her if a voided payment generated an automatic notification to the student, and she said yes by email within 24 hours, and I thanked her and hung up. The mortgage I left alone. The utilities I left alone. The homeowner's insurance I left alone. I wasn't going to let the house sit dark and cold while I was figuring out next steps. That wasn't the point. The point was that nothing in that house ran on her account or his, and now nothing ran on mine that was paying for theirs. The flow had reversed. I called a realtor at 3. A woman named Linda, recommended by Ed. She came over the next morning at 8, walked the house with a clipboard, asked me what I'd put into it, and quoted me a price that was about $40,000 more than I'd guessed. She said the market was tight, and the Colonial would move in a week. I told her to list it Friday. She said, "Will the occupants be a problem?" I said, "There are no occupants." She looked at me for a second, and then she said, "I'll have the sign in the yard by Friday afternoon." I checked into a Hampton Inn off the interstate. I ate a club sandwich at the bar of a chain restaurant next door. I called my sister in Toledo, which I hadn't done in about 4 months, and I told her what was happening, and she cried a little and said, "Thank God," which is not the response I expected, and which told me a few things I'd been too proud to ask about before. I slept 8 hours straight for the first time in I don't know how long. The first phone call from her came on Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon, while I was in the lobby of the hotel pouring myself a coffee from the machine that was always burnt. I let it ring. The second call was an hour later. The third was at 6. The fourth was at 7, and she left a voicemail. I listened to it standing by the window of my room. "Hank," her voice was tight, not crying. Tight. "Hank, the lock isn't working. My key isn't working. My key isn't working. What did you do? Did you change the locks? Call me back. The boy's tuition payment failed and his school sent him an email. What is going on? Call me." I noticed she didn't ask if I was okay. I noticed she didn't ask where I was. She asked what I had done, and she asked about the boy's tuition, and she did not, in the entire voicemail, say a single thing that suggested she had ever considered me a person whose absence might be felt. I waited until 8. Then I called back. She picked up on the first ring. "Hank, what did you do?" "I read the note," I said. There was a pause. "What note?" "The one on the kitchen island. The one you wrote me before you left." Another pause, longer. "Hank, that was we needed to talk about things." "That wasn't. It said, be out by Tuesday. It said the locks change Wednesday. I'm out. The locks are changed. You changed the locks on me? On a house I own, I said. Yes, that's our house. It's been in my name since 2014, I said. I have the deed. My lawyer has a copy. The county has the original. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear an air conditioner in the background, the dry desert kind. I could hear someone laughing. I think it was the boy. Hank, she said, and her voice changed. Softer now, the voice she used when she wanted me to fix something. This isn't how I wanted. It's how you wrote it, I said. I just took it seriously. She started to talk faster. The boy's tuition, the car insurance, the phone. She said his email had locked him out of the registration system for next semester. She said the insurance company had sent her a letter at the house. She said she didn't understand what was happening, why everything was breaking at the same time. Because everything ran through me, I said, and I'm not in the house anymore. You can't just. I can, I said. I did. The boy got on the phone then. I could tell because the tone shifted. He had a voice he used with me when he wanted something, flatter, harder, with a kind of put-upon impatience like I was a slow cashier. He said, Hank, you're being a child. I almost laughed. I didn't. I said, I'm 63 years old. I have spent 11 years paying for your phone, your car, your insurance, your tuition, and your roof. I am not being a child. You're trying to punish us. I'm not trying to do anything to you, I said. I'm doing things for me. The two are easy to confuse if you've never had to tell them apart. You said you'd help me through school. I helped you through school for 3 years, I said. I never agreed to fund the rest of your life. You're 23. Your mother and your father can sort out the next semester. I'm not your parent. I never was. You made sure of that. I heard him breathe out, hard, the way he did when he was about to say something nasty. His mother took the phone back before he could. Hank, she said, we can fix this. Come home, let's talk, we'll figure it out. There's no home to come to, I said. I'm selling the house. The realtor lists it Friday. The silence selling the house. The realtor lists it Friday. The silence that followed that one was a different kind of silence. It was a silence of someone discovering that the floor they were standing on was a trapdoor and the rope had just been cut. I'm not proud of feeling what I felt in that silence, but I felt it, and I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I felt the small, clean satisfaction of a man who has, after a very long time, told the truth out loud. You can't sell the house, she said. I can, I said. It's mine. Ed will be in touch about the divorce paperwork. Until then, you'll need to find somewhere to stay when you fly back. The locks are changed. I might want to argue about it on the phone. Hank, please. Good night, I said, and I hung up. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time after that. The phone rang twice more. I let it ring. Then I turned it face down on the nightstand, and I went down to the lobby, and I ate a piece of pie at the chain restaurant, and I came back up, and I slept again, deeply, and in the morning I woke before the alarm and felt no urge to apologize for anything. They flew home Sunday. By then the sign was in the yard and the realtor had done 2 showings. They drove from the airport to the house, and the boy tried his key and it didn't turn, and his mother tried hers, and it didn't turn, and they stood on the porch of a house that didn't belong to them in a neighborhood where the leaves were finally starting to fall, and the realtor's number was on a sign in the grass, and a locksmith's sticker was on the doorjamb where I'd put it. They called me. I didn't answer. They called Ed. Ed answer. He was very polite. He told them what their options were. He gave them a phone number for a hotel that had a weekly rate. He told them their belongings could be retrieved on Tuesday between noon and 4, with a third party present, after which the property would be staged for sale. The boy lost his housing at school because the tuition payment had bounced, and he couldn't register for the next semester until the balance was settled. His mother paid for it eventually, I heard, through his biological father, who apparently had some money after all. I don't know the details. I didn't ask. The phone plan I had carried for him for 9 years became his own bill, and the car insurance lapsed for a week before he got it transferred. during which week he didn't drive, which I imagine was inconvenient for him, and which I do not lose sleep over. The house sold in 11 days, above asking. The closing was in early January, and I drove to the title company in a snowstorm and signed my name to the deed for the last time. And I walked out into the cold with a cashier's check in my coat pocket for an amount that was, I have to be honest, more money than I'd ever held in one place at one time in my life. I deposited it that afternoon. I called my sister. I cried in the parking lot of the bank for about 15 minutes, not from grief, but from something I didn't have a word for at the time. I think I do now. I think it was the feeling of being given back to yourself after a long absence. The divorce was finalized in March. It was not contested. There was nothing to contest. The house had been mine. The cars had been mine. The bank accounts had been separate. She got the furniture and her own car, and a check from the marital savings that Ed and I had agreed was fair. I did not fight her on any of it. I had not done what I did to take anything from her. I had done it to stop giving. I bought a small ranch house in the spring, in a town about an hour from the old one, near a state park where I'd like to fish when I was a younger man. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a sun porch I've come to love more than any room I've ever owned. I have a garden now. I grow tomatoes that aren't very good, and peppers that are. I joined a men's breakfast at a diner on Wednesdays. I went on a date last fall with a widow named, well, I'm not going to tell you her name. She's a private person. We've had 8 dinners and 4 walks. She laughs at my jokes, the bad ones too, and she once told me I had a steady presence, and I almost flinched, because that was the same thing my second wife had said about me at the church potluck 20 years ago. But this woman said it different. She said it like she meant it as a description, not a job description. There's a difference. I know the difference now. I haven't spoken to my second wife since the day I hung up on her in the hotel room. I haven't spoken to her son since then either. I know he graduated. My sister knows somebody who knows somebody. I'm glad he graduated. I hope he turns into a man someday and not just a person who got older. There's a difference there too. I want to say something before I'm done about the years I gave, because I know how this story sounds. It sounds like the years were wasted. They weren't. I learned things in those years. I learned how to put in a water heater and how to shingle a small section of roof. I learned how to keep my mouth shut at a dinner table when keeping it shut was the lesser of 2 costs. I learned eventually the difference between being needed and being wanted, which is the only lesson I think really matters past a certain age, and which is a lesson that, in my experience, you can only learn the hard way. If you are watching this and you have spent a long time being the one who pays, the one who fixes, the one who keeps the lights on in a house that doesn't quite see you, I am not here to tell you what to do. I am only here to tell you that there is, on the other side of the decision, a kind of quiet you have probably forgotten exists. It isn't the quiet of being alone. It is the quiet of not having to listen for what someone is going to want from you next. That morning when I read the note, I thought I was about to lose everything I had. It turned out I had already lost it, years before, in increments so small I never noticed the math. What I did that day wasn't take anything back. It was just stop pretending I still had it. I sat on my sun porch this morning with a cup of coffee and watched the light come up over the yard. The cardinal that lives in my hedge was already at the feeder. The coffee was the right strength for once. I thought about the kitchen island in the old house, and the yellow legal paper, and the 3 lines that had ended one life and started another. And I thought I wouldn't change a single thing about how I answered it. That's the whole story. Thank you for listening. If any of it sounded familiar, I hope you find your own quiet, and I hope you find it soon. I think about that morning more than I expected to. Not the note itself. The note was just paper, but the 11 years that made the note possible, because a piece of yellow legal paper on a kitchen island doesn't appear out of nowhere. It gets written one small surrender at a time by 2 people over a long stretch of years where one of them keeps quiet and the other keeps taking, and neither of them ever quite admits what's happening. I want to be careful about who I blame for that, because I have done some hard thinking in the years since, and the honest answer isn't satisfying. My wife took advantage of a man who was easy to take advantage of. Her son learned from watching her that I was a tap you could turn without asking. Both of those things are true. But I was the one who installed the tap. I was the one who kept it running. Every time I let a thank you go unsaid and didn't mention it. Every time I paid a bill I hadn't agreed to and didn't bring it up. Every time I sat at a dinner table and swallowed a sentence I should have said out loud. I was teaching them. I was their teacher. They were good students. That's the cause and effect of it, and I don't think you can understand what happened without holding both ends of the chain at once. They acted badly. I trained them to expect that I would absorb it. The note on the kitchen island was a test at the end of the course, and they thought they knew the answer. They didn't, because the one thing I had been working on, quietly in some private room of myself for the last year or two, was a different answer. If I've anything to say to a younger man watching this, it isn't about revenge, and it isn't about being hard. The world has plenty of hard men, and most of them are lonely for reasons they refuse to examine. What I'd say is this: be honest about what you're paying for, and be honest about what you're getting, not in a small accountant's way, in the way a grown man owes himself. If the people in your house cannot say your name with respect, you are not in a marriage. You are in an arrangement, and arrangements end. They always end. The only question is whether you end them on your feet or on your back. It takes character to keep paying the mortgage and not slam the door behind you. It takes intelligence to read the deed before you sign it, and to read the room you've been living in for a decade. And it takes the kind of grit that doesn't announce itself, the quiet kind, the kind that just gets up one Tuesday morning and makes a phone call, to walk out of a life that was costing you more than you could afford. I am 66 years old. I have a sun porch and a bad tomato garden and a woman who laughs at my jokes. I gave up a house and got back a life. I would do it again tomorrow.